Reaction is pouring in after Mikhail Gorbachev, the man who steered the breakup of the Soviet Union, died yesterday in Moscow. Gorbachev is credited with producing the reforms that led to the collapse of communism and the end of the Cold War. He also was in power when Eastern European nations were freed from Soviet rule. He died following a long illness at the age of 91. Pope Francis is among the world leaders remembering him today. And we go now to Paul Kengor, professor of political science at Grove City College and author of A Pope and a President, John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, and the Extraordinary Untold Story of the 20th century. Dr. Kengor, great to have you on. Mikhail Gorbachev really was a pivotal figure during the end of the Cold War. Let's talk about that and what you see as his legacy.
Yeah, he really was, Tracy. Good to be with you again. And on this sad occasion, although he did make it to 91 years old, and he outlived almost all the other major Cold War figures, you know, Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher, Václav Havel, even his rival, Boris Yeltsin. And I think maybe the most interesting episode to Catholics, there was really a historic meeting on December 1st, 1989 at the Vatican between John Paul II and Mikhail Gorbachev, the first ever meeting between a Soviet general secretary and a pope. And right after that meeting, they met for about 70 minutes together in the Vatican Library. And the minutes on this were not disclosed until about 20 years later by the Russian government. But after this wonderful meeting, Mikhail Gorbachev walks out, and he's with John Paul II, and he walks up to his wife, Raisa, and he said, "Raisa, I'd like you to meet His Holiness Pope John Paul II. Besides being the mightiest moral authority on earth, he's a Slav just like us." And John Paul II smiled and said, "Yes, it's true. I'm a Slav just like you." So they really hit it off. They got along really well. And it was figures like those two that helped peacefully end the Cold War and shut down what indeed had been an evil, atheistic Soviet empire.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I know he also paid a visit and prayed at the tomb of St. Francis of Assisi. What more can you tell us about that and also about his faith?
Yeah, it's an amazing story. So it was mid-March 2008, and I mean, no one had any idea that this was going on. So we always knew that Gorbachev was, Ronald Reagan suspected that Gorbachev was a closet Christian. In fact, Gorbachev had been baptized secretly by his mother, Maria, in the Russian Orthodox Church when he was a baby. And she would take an icon, a cross, actually, off the wall of their cottage and like secretly bless him with it. So we always thought that maybe he was a Christian. No one really knew. John Paul II called him a providential man. Both he and Reagan tried to figure out, is this Soviet leader a Christian? So they never really knew. Those two died 2004, 2005. And then one day in mid-March 2008, Gorbachev shows up at the tomb of St. Francis in Assisi. And a London Telegraph reporter walked by and looked down, and there's Gorbachev on his knees praying at the tomb of St. Francis. And the reporter said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but you're Mikhail Gorbachev, correct?" And Gorbachev went on to explain that he had this special veneration for St. Francis. He said, "St. Francis brought me to the church." And everybody wondered at the time, church? What church? Capital C church? Catholic church? Russian Orthodox church? This church? This building? This structure? And it was immediately reported in the London Telegraph and other publications that Gorbachev had become a Christian. And very quickly after that, just days later, Gorbachev came out and said, "The reports are false. I have not become a Christian. These reports are fantasy." And really, Tracy, till as far as we know, as far as we could tell, till his final days on earth, he never came out and publicly said whether or not he was a Christian. I guess he took that one to the grave with him.
Yeah, such an interesting story, I have to tell you. Unfortunately, I have to switch gears here just slightly before we let you go, but I want to touch on this. On Sunday, Pope John Paul I will be beatified. If you don't mind, can you talk to us a little bit more about this and his legacy?
Yeah, it's interesting how it connects to all of this, isn't it? He had been Pope for 33 days, and that was it, 33 days. And very unexpectedly died, and that made the way for John Paul II. And in fact, you wouldn't have John Paul II if you didn't have John Paul I. Of course, John Paul I wasn't called John Paul I at the time. And he was only there for a little over a month. John Paul II succeeded him. At the time, everybody wondered, what could be all of this in the hands of Providence? John Paul II used to like to say, in the hands of Providence, there's no such thing as a coincidence. So he gave way to John Paul II, who became Pontiff for 27 years, 1978 to 2005. And of course, if not for him, being a Slavic pope from Poland, of all places, you wouldn't have had what happened between him and Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. And I bet the Cold War wouldn't have ended when it did and the way that it did from 1989 to 1991.
Well, Dr. Kengor, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us. We always appreciate your insights. God bless you.
Thank you, Tracy. Anytime.